Hello, this is Brian from All Bodies Outside, and thanks for joining us today. On this episode, I have Dylan Corbin, and he worked for the National Park Service as a seasonal ranger in 2012, 2013, and 2015, and he served as an interpreter and an educator. And for those of you that are aware of what an interpreter is with the National Park Service, that's someone that aims to help visitors make their own connections to the park and the stories that the park has with its history. During this time when he worked with National Park Service, he was at Yellowstone National Park, and he had the unique experience of getting attacked by a grizzly bear. During that attack, he was bitten in the leg and clawed in the head and narrowly survived. And so today on this episode, we're going to hear from Dylan about his grizzly bear attack and how that has impacted his life today in 2022 and soon to be 2023. So, hey, Dylan, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks. Happy to be here.
Yeah, where are you calling in from?
I'm in Seattle, and calling in from my office actually.
Okay. How have you all been getting some snow out there with it being December?
Yeah, snowed a little last week. Really snowing a lot on the pass, so I'm excited to get my skis out soon and head up there. Haven't been skiing just yet, but
Okay,
um,
nice.
it's supposed to be a good early season so far.
That's good to hear. Good to hear on a number of levels. So back in 2012, 2013, and 2015, you were working as a seasonal ranger with National Park Service. And first off, before we get into the grizzly bear attack, which is going to be the exciting piece of information today on this podcast episode, I first wanted to hear about how you came to get employed as a seasonal ranger with the National Park Service, because that's something that's very desirable with a lot of people. National Park Service is a national treasure, and a lot of people want to work for them. So, how did you get started with that?
Yeah, to be honest, it was just sort of something I hadn't planned on falling into, and then after, well, back when I was an undergrad, I, went and did a study abroad program. And back then, I thought I really wanted to be in the foreign service. So I think, to some extent, public service really called to me. And, I thought I wanted to, pursue a career in government. And, I thought the State Department would be a really cool way to do that. So, went and spent a semester in Tanzania at the University of Dar es Salaam. And, um, I think coming back and reflecting on that, I realized that probably wasn't the right career choice for me. It was fun in some ways, really difficult in other ways. So I kind of found myself that summer between my junior and senior years of college, just kind of wondering what to do. So still with that public service mindset, I ended up applying and being accepted to be a volunteer at Bryce Canyon National Park. So spent an unpaid summer there. They did house me. And that's kind of where I started to get my experience doing interpretation. I worked at the visitor center at Bryce Canyon. Really loved being in the national park. Um, just being there, talking to visitors, educating them about Bryce Canyon and the Park Service. And coming out of that, I knew, this the ranger life could be really something fun to pursue, and that I would find really rewarding. So, coming out of that, I was able to the summer after my senior year, work with the Oregon State Parks at Detroit Lake State Park up in the Cascades, and then kind of felt like I graduated the next summer by accepting the job in Yellowstone. And yeah, I honestly I got really lucky. I feel like because probably applied to 300, maybe not, 200 different parks, national
Wow.
monuments, historic sites, anywhere, and got a few calls back, but Yellowstone was the first one to offer a job, and I took it, and yeah, yeah,
What,
and
what a
that was the beginning. Yeah.
what a dream. I mean, I wouldn't have expected. I feel like is it a lucky thing to get you started off with Bryce Canyon, you did some other different types of parks, and then you for the National Park Service then landed at Yellowstone National
hmm
Park, and those are, I gotta imagine, two highly sought after parks to work at.
I think so. Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways that people I think would rate the parks. There's definitely some of the folks who would prefer the I don't know, Gates of the Arctic or uh, one of the real remote quiet postings because
Right, right.
Yellowstone and Bryce are fun, but they are not quiet. You're talking to people all day, and those are, well, two of the most visited parks there are, and so that takes a little bit of a different skill set compared to being out at one of the Alaska parks where you're not having that level of visitor contact. And I could see the appeal of that too, but to me, Yellowstone was just kind of the perfect mix of meeting new people every day and really encountering people from all over the world, which was a lot of fun. It was never boring. Um, what Yellowstone offers that some parks don't too is that it's very, very active in terms of science. So, in the living situation that I had, I was meeting, and becoming friends with, some of the park scientists who were there to do, wolf research or study the geology. And that was so cool too. And, that experience just living in that dorm setting with these researchers was something that I was then able to pass on to visitors too, and really valued that.
Do you think living in that dorm setting was something that inspired you to go into graduate school at the University of Utah?
Yeah, I mean, that that's how we actually got to meet is you know doing related but different research at Utah. And yeah, it was in some ways I was a little jealous of the roommates I had who were out doing research in the field. And I realized that's something that I could be working on too. And had to kind of pursue my own path to it, which I think maybe we can get into a little more later, because I think the kind of research that I worked on was not the real traditional national park research, but definitely speaks to someone like me who had a lot of interaction with visitors. Um, yeah, I mean, it was really cool to see how having been a pretty fresh grad, to see how the academic mindset could be um, applied to a place that a lot of people kind of think of as a tourist destination or an outdoors playground.
Right, right, right. So when you came into Yellowstone National Park as a seasonal ranger, and you're going to be doing interp and education. What's the training like for that? I mean, I feel like a lot of different facets of different skill sets that you have to learn. First off, the knowledge, but the way with interacting with different visitors, delivering that messaging in an effective way. There's seems like there's multiple skill sets involved. So I got to imagine there's a little bit of training. What was that training like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what we start with is, those of us coming in seasonally start with a week um, in a part of the park that's actually not open to the general public yet. The seasonal nature of Yellowstone, a lot of the roads don't actually open until early May, and so we're there in late April. That year we gathered at Yellowstone Lake, and if you've been to Yellowstone, there's, oh gosh, what, 5 or 6 major villages, and each one has its own separate interpretive staff. So you bring everyone together and just do a week of, that wouldn't be unfamiliar if you've done, like a seminar style class in a university. So
Okay.
just getting, short hour and a half long lectures from different subject matter experts coming in, and where you're learning about the ecology, geology, history of Yellowstone.
A
And at the
lot.
same time, yeah, also getting that professional development experience. How do you talk to visitors? How do you put together a presentation? How do you handle controversial subjects as they come up? And because there are certainly those as it relates to Yellowstone too.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and some of that's also just building camaraderie and learning about your fellow coworkers. And a lot of answering questions for people is about knowing where to find the resource rather than actually just having the whole encyclopedia of knowledge in your head. And
Oh,
that's,
gotcha.
yeah. And knowing what books, what maps, or who to call if a question's really stumping you. That's a really key piece of knowledge.
So you go through this week long training with everyone else, and there's a bunch of speakers. They're delivering all sorts of skill sets. You're learning from them, and it's impossible to know every fact about Yellowstone. I mean, Yellowstone just has so much going on there. So you go through your week training, and after that, as a seasonal ranger, how does that work? Do they post you up at different sites? Do you have maybe two or three other interp and education rangers that are working with you, and you all are working a site? How's that work?
Yeah, as a seasonal, you are assigned for the summer or whatever your season is to a particular station. So for me, that was the Mammoth Hot Springs. If you've been to Yellowstone, that's the first village you reach as you come in the north
Okay.
entrance from Montana. And so everyone is posted up at, you know, Mammoth or Canyon or Yellowstone Lake or Old Faithful, and that's where you're set for your summer. And gosh, I would think there were 10 of us my first year in 2012. A pretty common number there, just given the amount of visitors you're interacting with and the amount of programming that's being put on, those ranger walks and talks. Um, and I that was a great staff to be a part of. We were a mix, about half of us were in our first year there. And then the other half, we had some great rangers who had been coming back year after year, and was able to gain a lot of just a lot of knowledge from them. Getting to shadow some of them who have uh, been delivering uh, a ranger guided tour of the hot springs for several years was really informative, and kind of gave me the basis to build my own tour off of too.
Okay. Okay. Nice. And so, at most national parks, we see these. There's at every national park. There's a lot of interpretation going on, a lot of education going on, and you and I are very familiar with that from our backgrounds, personal experiences, education experiences, professional experiences. But for those listening out there that aren't as familiar with interpretation programs and education programs in National Park Service, why are these programs important?
hmm Yeah, the term interpretation itself is, I think, kind of funny. Um, yeah, I think when a lot of people hear that, they assume it's, you're out there to interact with French language speakers and, interpret the English into French for them. And it's a different take on the term interpretation. And, the way to think about it is that, um, you're there to help visitors who don't speak the language of Yellowstone really understand its value. Um, yeah, and so I think that's a really key role of interpreters at national parks or at historic sites or what have you. I like to think that the National Park Service in a lot of ways is our national storyteller. Um, it is something. It's no longer unique to the U.S., but it is something that we really pioneered as a country, was having national parks. It was, and I maybe feel some pride here because Yellowstone was the very first one, and kind of came about as this funny confluence of history and geography. And I think in a lot of countries, a place like Yellowstone would have been set aside for the king as his personal domain, and that clearly doesn't work for us. So we end
Right.
up with this national park. But if you really survey the um, all of the lands that are preserved under the National Park Service, you get these really grand, spectacular outdoor spaces like Yellowstone. But then you also have places that are really key to our nation's history. You can go to Ellis Island and also see a park ranger in a flat hat, and you can go to presidential birthplaces and you know locations of Civil War battlefields and
Right.
civil rights icons. So the piece there is that the in a lot of ways, like, the Mammoth Hot Springs don't have a lot of meaning in and of themselves. There's a lot of imparted meaning about why is this place important and why is it worth protecting. Um, there are a lot of hot springs in the world, and why is this particular collection of hot springs so special? And I think there's a piece of telling the story of them. Um, really, yeah, I think that's really maybe more obvious at Yellowstone than in other places. But if you think about like the Little Rock Central High School, the building itself doesn't have a lot of meaning. It's another old high school in a um, in a city, but you get some interpretive signage, or you get a park ranger there to really tell the story of why this particular high school is so important to our nation's history. That's where I think interpretation really becomes vital.
Yeah, I liked what you said earlier with first off, National Park Service kind of being our national storyteller, but evoking meaning and value, through that storytelling, and that helps people. You interpret that area and tell its story, and then people start to feel connected to it. They feel value in it, and then they're probably more inclined to become stewards of the area, and really have pride in the area, and really come to love the area. But I'd never thought about that with the National Park Service being kind of our national storytelling agency in a way. And when most of us think of the national park system, we think of the iconic parks, Yellowstone, Acadia, Yosemite, Grand Teton, Bryce Canyon. But I think I'd have to look it up. Is there over like 600 sites managed by the National Park Service?
Yeah, I can never. I used to have the number memorized, but it's a
Yeah, I don't either.
it's an always shifting. I mean, it's an ever-growing list. According to
Yeah, ever
Wikipedia,
growing.
it's 423 right now, and
Okay.
every year there's at least a few more added. When I
Yeah.
travel personally, one of my favorite things is to just check out the little kind of out of the way, or less known national park sites. I really always get a lot of value out of that. Yeah, this summer I went to the Martin Van Buren House,
Really?
near midway between
Cool.
Albany and Manhattan, and yeah,
Right
I
on.
just got to learn a little about what is he, our eighth president? So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. When I went to did my PhD in South Carolina at Clemson University, I drove about an hour and a half north and went to the Carl Sandburg House, and he's a poet, Midwest poet. He has a lot of great poetry that revolves around Chicago and telling the story of Chicago. I think in the early 1900s, maybe in the 1920s, and he eventually retired in southern North Carolina. And his house now is managed by the National Park Service, and he has a whole little farmstead there, a lot of property and whatnot. And I went there twice during my PhD, and I just really loved the National Park Service. I got some great tours there both times, and then just kind of checking, like trying to connect to Carl Sandburg through his house, his poetry and whatnot. And I think like we're talking about, there's a lot of national historic sites managed by the National Park Service. There's heritage sites managed by the National Park Service. I know locally here where I live in Kansas, we have a local park that is designated by the National Park Service as a National Historic Site, although we don't have National Park Service employees out here. It's a very small place. It's about 160 acres, but it's a location where they've restored the native tall grass prairie back to what it was like, but also has that huge heritage component in primarily two ways. First one being is it was a place that the indigenous people really loved. It's on a small little mountain for Kansas. It's 200 feet high, which is a big mountain. And what's nice about though when you're up there is you can see the Kansas River flowing, and so it just feels very lively. It's probably a place that was being able to see the river and knowing that maybe you can get fish in there and there's other wildlife that are drinking that water. It's a place where there's abundancy. And so that was a place where indigenous people were known to live. Additionally, this place is really as part of that heritage component because the Underground Railroad ran through it. And I didn't even know before I moved to Kansas that the Underground Railroad
Mm.
came through the area. And so it's just fantastic to hear what the National Park Service does. And again, just to give you kudos with kind of calling it our national storytelling agency, if you want to call it that, is really cool. But hey, let's get back to Yellowstone National Park. And so, as an interpreter, usually you are out with someone else. But at one point, first off, what year was it that the grizzly bear attack occurred? And then you must have been out by yourself, maybe, or maybe you're just a little bit disjointed from your group. How did that happen?
Yeah, so this was 2013. So this was my second year working there. Yeah, I was actually with a friend. So, I mentioned the kind of learning powwow that we do to start the season.
Mm-hmm.
And, during that time, because there is a safety focus on not hiking alone in Yellowstone because it is grizzly bear country. And, one of the key things to do is be with honestly, ideally a group of three or more. I will say there were two of us. But one of the things that we did was just share emails for people with the same days off. Um, yeah, if I'm remembering right, I had Tuesdays and Wednesdays were my weekend that summer. So it makes it a little challenging to find people to be able to just go out hiking with. And um, yeah, had a friend who was stationed down at Yellowstone Lake. I was up at Mammoth Hot Springs again, and if you're at all familiar with Yellowstone, you know that that's around a 3-hour drive from point to point. So
Okay.
we actually picked out a hike that was about equidistant for both of us to drive to. Um, it's called the Signet Lakes hike. It's on Yellowstone's Central Plateau, and it's not a particularly highly trafficked hike. Um, it's not I it doesn't have a lot of the spectacle that a lot of other parts of Yellowstone offer. So no geysers, no canyon, no hot springs. It was supposed to just be a nice hike out to a chain of lakes out on a plateau. And yeah, I mean, so really there were just the two of us. It was a Wednesday morning, and yeah, we were hiking through some thick trees as the trail kind of winded back and forth. And yeah, I was hiking in lead and ended up encountering a grizzly bear and a sow and cub, so a mama bear and her one or probably cub of the year. Just a few month old cub walking the trail back towards us. And at that point, we were both carrying bear spray on our hip as is recommended, and got the bear sprays out right away. I do recall that the cub actually ran out from behind mom as she was walking towards us. At that point, my memory's a little fuzzy on the actual chain of events after that, but I do recall y- using my bear spray, actually using up the whole can and being out. I recall Sasha calling out to me to play dead, which is, what you do. So being down on the ground, hands over neck, um, yeah, trying to make yourself known as not a threat to the bear. And then I just remember kind of coming to, gathering myself up, and just needing to get out of there. So, at some point, Sasha called out to me, just asking if I was okay, and I was okay enough. And yeah, and then we started hiking back. Um, if anyone, if you're not familiar with bear spray, it's really awful stuff to get in your eyes or nose or skin. It really burns. It's just like pepper spray that comes out in a big cloud. So we had we had the pepper spray all over us. Um, yeah, really, burning skin and eyes, and just causing us to tear and snot. But yeah, I was able to walk, not not swiftly for sure, but uh, yeah, we did gather ourselves up and start walking back towards our cars. Got pretty fortunate because I never did, but Sasha carried her park radio with her on the hike. And, that was really lucky because she was able to call for help right away. Um, we ended up encountering a second group of hikers just like a quarter mile away as we were walking back, and they helped us further, got us some more water. They had some bandages with them, so to help me out. I was you know bleeding from my head where I was scratched. Um, yeah, I didn't really at the time realize the extent of the bite that I had taken to my right thigh, but yeah, I was able to walk. The husband from that uh, pair of hikers helped me out and let me use them kind of as a crutch. Yeah, and they gave me some bandages to apply to my head. Yeah, I'm sure it was a rough sight to come across. Um, us on the trail going back towards them. Um, Sasha was not undamaged either. She had taken, some scratches across the upper arm, and
Wow.
yeah, it was pretty harrowing. But about halfway back to our car, we met the Rangers, a group of, gosh, 10, 12 Rangers from, the bear team and from law enforcement and paramedics all came out to meet us. They had brought a stretcher, but since, I was ambulatory, there was no need to stretcher me out. Some of the Rangers went further on, just like when there's a car crash, you get the investigators there to check out the scene of the crime and write a report. They went further out to the scene of the incident. I had been wearing a hat that day, and it got knocked off, and I didn't pick it up, and that actually turned out to be lucky for the Rangers because it made it pretty clear,
Hmm.
um, where the incident had happened, and they went and yeah took photos and really tried to study it, and it sounds like they could tell where it had happened too just by the markings on the ground, where we had disrupted the dirt and the twigs in the ground, and um, yeah, and then I went back to the trailhead, and they had a couple ambulances there waiting for us, so I ended up needing to go to the hospital in Bozeman, which is a pretty long ambulance ride. I
Wow.
ended up being in that ambulance for like 3.5 hours to get up to the hospital in Bozeman.
Wow.
Um, yeah, but I was in pretty good spirits, especially once they got the IV in me with some painkiller.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
but
Probably in good spirits after that.
yeah, but yeah, in Bozeman, it was I honestly didn't even need to spend the night in the hospital. So it was,
Whoa.
I was discharged after getting some staples in my head and some stitches to close up my leg. I think the worst part, well, there were two worst parts. One was the chemical shower I had to take just to get the bear spray off because I remember, they went in to go stitch me up and were taking off the clothes that I was wearing, and everyone in the room started to cough because the bear spray had caked
Wow.
in. So at that point, I needed to remove all my clothes, get a gown on, and go use their chemical shower to get all that off of me. That is very cold, and that was not super pleasant, especially after having been in the ambulance for that 3.5 hours. At that point, trying to walk on my leg just didn't work anymore. So nearly fell over before one of the nurses caught me and got me
Wow.
a crutch to go into the shower with. And then, I mean, the other part that was really painful was just having the wounds irrigated, just really cleaned out because the bites had gone pretty deep. Just needing to make sure, yeah, I mean, that there were no bacteria in there or anything that was going to cause issues after getting stitched up. Um, this People do ask me, did I need a rabies shot? But I have, I do proudly have uh, the treatment or the paperwork from the hospital that states, your injury was animal bite other. And I always enjoy the other piece of that. I assume there's a cat category, a dog category, maybe horse in Montana, but No, I got
Both
other,
bear.
which I enjoyed. And
Yeah.
I also learned the animal that bit me is not known to carry rabies. So, if anyone out
Oh.
there is ever bitten by a grizzly bear, you don't apparently have to worry about the rabies shot.
So was the grizzly bear that attacked you? Was it a collared one?
No, actually, not a collared bear, but the bear team was able to identify which bear she was. Um, they had actually happened to be doing flights over that part of the park that morning, and believe they spotted her
Hmm.
during those flights when they were surveying the bear population. The other thing is, and Sasha corroborates this, but for both of us, it was the blondest bear we'd ever seen, and that really stood out too. And when we said that to the bear team, that everyone kind of nodded, and we're pretty sure we know which bear, because
Right.
there was a very very blonde sow with one cub known to be on the Central Plateau. So I mean that really narrows it down.
Yeah. So when your memory goes fuzzy, did you go unconscious for a second or two, or is it just it was so quick and it's horrific and you're in survival mode and memory's not doing the best at that point? What kind of went on there?
Yeah, it's honestly hard to say. I presume I did lose consciousness for some time, or maybe the surge of adrenaline just disrupted making proper memories. Because there's when I think back on it, there's just kind of these, not really a distinct narrative of the memory, but just these snapshots of what was happening. Just remembering seeing the bear walking the trail, remember seeing the cub run out from behind, grabbing my bear spray. I remember being out of bear spray, and then I remember being, on the ground. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't remember the actual moment of being bitten. Um, don't remember smelling the bear or, feeling the bear on me or on my body. None of that. And yeah, remember walking out and remember all that. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, the
It,
actual moment's just kind of spotty.
yeah, I was going to ask you about that smell, but yeah, the memories are spotty, and it sounds like you did, everything kind of, exactly what you're supposed to do under those types of circumstances with, spraying your bear spray, get down on the ground, protect your neck, showing the bear, let the bear know that you're not there to, especially, do something to its cub because it was there to protect its cub. And so putting together these events, the mom came to you first and then went to your friend Sasha second. Is that correct?
Yes, or I believe so.
Yeah. Wow. So once this goes on, this is in 2013, and you survive this attack. You're in the hospital for a little while, and so how does the National Park Service handle you as an employee after that for the rest of the summer?
Yeah, I ended up being on or off work for a couple weeks. First just kind of on bed rest for the first week, and then was able to start walking around again during the second week, and just I had some modified duties at first, so whereas what I would usually be out walking around engaging with visitors, but for my first little bit back, I worked at the desk, and um, yeah, wore basketball shorts and sat in a chair and um, worked at the visitor center desk answering questions. Um, and then honestly, after about 3 weeks, I was just back to regular duties.
Okay.
The
Okay.
healing was not that bad. Um,
Do you have any? Because you're an avid hiker, and do you have any long term muscle damage where you're? What leg was it?
my right leg.
Your
Yeah,
right
and
leg.
honestly, everything's fine. Got really
Oh,
lucky.
good for you.
Yeah, yeah, no problems. Yeah, whatsoever.
Yeah, yeah, you got really lucky. And then, you don't have any long term physical issues are there? What about cognitively? I know that right now in the Seattle area, are there, if you were to maybe go northeast, maybe are there some grizzly bears?
Supposedly, there's a population in the North Cascades.
Okay.
Apparently they're very, very reclusive and not really seen. I think, yeah, and I mean, at first it was a little difficult to go out hiking, especially solo hiking.
Hmm.
Um, there was always this kind of feeling of being concerned about what's coming around the corner, being very wary of my surroundings. That's really just kind of faded away with time. So now I feel pretty comfortable out there. I think if it was grizzly bear country, if I was back in Yellowstone or up in Glacier Park or something, that would weigh on me a little more.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I'd love to take my girlfriend out to Yellowstone someday, but I think we would definitely need to find another couple to go with because we're not going hiking just the two of us. It's going to be three or more
Yeah.
anytime we're out now. So there's that kind of thought. But other than that, honestly, it really just took time to get back to feeling normal out in nature. Yeah, the first few months were particularly difficult, but I mean, and to be totally honest, after trying to be out there, doing my regular ranger job, after coming back, after, gosh, what, 3 weeks on duty, I actually accepted a job with the Woodland Park Zoo in Seattle. Um, Part of it that was just not feeling right,
Hmm.
around the big animals anymore. Like if you've been to Mammoth Hot Springs, you know that there's a resident elk herd, and I just couldn't get to feeling comfortable um, in an authoritative position around those animals. So I thought, yeah, was looking for opportunity for the winter, with the intention to come back to Yellowstone the following year, but that ended up transitioning to spending a couple years in Seattle, um, in an education position, first with the zoo and then with the Pacific Science Center, and then um, eventually that became needing a new career path, and ended up going to Utah for a master's program in city planning. So took a little bit of a pivot, um, you know, not
Yeah.
not wanting to reject being outdoors or being in nature, because I actually did come back for one more season between um, between leaving Seattle and starting school in Salt Lake. But um, yeah, I definitely had a pretty big impact on my life trajectory and my career trajectory um, from that incident.
Yeah, I gotta say, it takes a lot of courage to, because you said that you were a seasonal ranger in 2013 and then again in 2015. Going back to that, in 2013 was the year of the attack. Gosh, going back and working as a seasonal ranger. And was it at Yellowstone in 2015?
Hmm.
It was. That's
It
a lot of
was, yeah.
courage right there.
Yeah, looking back on it, it maybe wasn't the right choice because it was definitely challenging.
Yeah.
Um, but, I think, uh, I don't know, right or wrong choice is probably the wrong way to frame it. But yeah,
Yeah.
it was particularly challenging, just being out, in nature that summer. I recall going out and doing some hiking, but um, even like a fox scurrying across the trail, I'd be feeling very hyper aware after something like that, and walking with the bear spray in my hand, which is probably an overreaction to a fox. But
Well, I think it's okay for, especially in surviving a grizzly bear
yeah.
attack. And so, you brought up the bear spray again. And I was wondering if you know, because I don't know if the so the bear spray technology sprays a cloud almost, and so hopefully the grizzly bear goes through that cloud. It gets affected by this kind of pepper spray. Has the technology of bear spray remained the same for the past decade, or is there? has it become
Yeah.
more effective at stopping grizzly? Like, because in your situation, you sprayed out the whole canister. The grizzly bear had to have passed through it, and then maybe while it was blinded up and whatnot, it was still in its instinctive mode to, make sure that you and your friend Sasha were not a threat.
Hmm.
Um, which I guess, maybe had you not sprayed the bear canister, maybe the attack would have lasted longer. So maybe it did, really save you. Those are questions that will never be answered. But that cloud effect seems effective to me. Has bear spray changed at all in the last decade?
Not as far as I know, to be honest, but um, yeah, I mean, I'll admit I don't don't own bear spray anymore either, and haven't bought a canister in several years. I used to keep my old bear spray around as home defense too, because if it stops a bear, it'll certainly stop an intruder. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, it expires after a while anyway, so I don't have any bear spray. But yeah, I'm sure I'm sure there's improvements that could be made, but it's hard for me to imagine what could, how you could improve on it other than, maybe changes to the actual design of the canister to make it easier to deploy or less likely to go off in your bag or your car accidentally. Um, I mean, I think to me, the exacerbating factor in the whole attack was really the cub. Uh, had she not had a cub with her, I doubt we would have been charged at all. I
Mhm.
bet, had there not been a cub, she would have just ran away.
Yeah, that's my guess too. It sounded like it was, like you said, it was her cub of the year. So full protection mode is on. And what month did the attack occur in?
It was August,
It
so,
was
the
August.
cub would
Yeah,
have only been 4 or 5 months.
right. First summer. Some winter comes quick in Yellowstone. So there's a lot to prepare for and get through. That's an amazing story, Dylan. And, you know, really thank you so much for, being vulnerable enough to share that. And that's something that, probably is not easy to relive, cognitively speaking. So I really appreciate you coming on to Old Bodies Outside and being willing to discuss something that was darn horrific.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Yeah, thanks for connecting, and happy to share my story. And I think when I really think about it, it is a pivotal moment in my life. But I mean, it's almost 10 years ago now. It'll be 10 years this coming August. And if you had asked me 10 years ago to be reflecting on it now, I think what's surprising to me now, thinking back on it, is how sometimes just insignificant it feels. I mean, you go on with life after trauma, and um, you don't stop. So, to me, there's been plenty more difficult moments, but there's been a lot of accomplishments, and the more time I put between that and the present, it just, it doesn't feel like it defines me anymore. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
when after it first happened, I told everybody, everyone I met got to hear the story because I thought, this crazy thing happened to me and it gives my life meaning now. But, I think what I've really learned is that it's not, uh, the meaning or the purpose to my life is really, I have a lot more agency in it than just
Right.
waiting for some crazy event to happen. And so there's been lot of, lot of accomplishments and a lot of, other pieces to the journey. So, that's what I really think about now when I reflect on it. Some of me, there's a voice in me that almost thinks like, hey, did that really happen? Because that's not, I'm not out there giving lecture tours and barnstorming the country. It's not, I'm not, oh, I shouldn't say it. I'm not Sully. Um,
Yeah.
I'm not defined by the one moment. And I shouldn't say that. I'm sure he has other stuff going on now too. But I'll never get a
Yeah. No, I
talk in
like
this
that
movie.
though. Yeah. And yeah, I knew what you're referencing, and that's a heck of a story in itself. But I liked what you said there. Just concluding thoughts that you're not defined by this event that was out of your control, is somewhat random to your life. You have agency, and you've been up to a lot of good work. You've done a lot of good research. You've also had probably fantastic personal accomplishments too, and done some awesome travels and whatnot. I think that's something that's a really cool concluding statement, that we have the agency to continue forward and do our own accomplishments and not be defined by probably a 15-second moment of life. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Dylan. Well, thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate it. And we will wrap it up. I'm going to throw in some outro music here. Okay.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.